Well, on to the big CNBC TV 18 exclusive. Anger and emotions are winning the arguments in today's world while data and facts suffer. That's the word coming in from World Bank President Yong Kim speaking to Shireen Ban in Dhaka. He expressed concern over the rising protectionist rhetoric in the US and Europe. He also spoke about the consequences of a Brexit and how India and emerging markets can tide through those volatile times.
Are the risks of deglobalization, and this is not rhetoric anymore, this is real. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the US with the presidential race, how concerned are you at this point in time, and what will be the implications if what, for instance, Donald Trump is talking about, saying that NAFTA doesn't work, the TPP is not going to work or is a bad idea? What happens then as far as global trade, like as we know it today, is concerned?
Well, we're very concerned about this because, as a rule, when the global economy was growing at about 3.5%, trade was growing at 7%. So trade was growing at double the rate of global economic growth. And now that we're at 2.4%, trade growth this past year was just 1.7%. And so the number of consecutive quarters during which trade has gone down is extremely long, among the longest periods in recent history.
Do you see it getting worse?
Well, we need to do everything we can to make it get better. Because I think there's just a fundamental misconception about the impact of trade, for example, on job loss. If you talk to the World Trade Organization, Roberto Acevedo, who's the head of WTO, has said to us that they've looked and looked and looked. And if you go to OECD countries, the most they can ever see in terms of the impact of trade on job loss is about 20% of job loss. And the rest is innovation and efficiency. But people can't be against innovation and efficiency, so they end up being against trade. Now, there's no question that there is some job loss due to trade, but this is simply now how the global economy works. And what every country has to do is to think, okay, what are the jobs that are going to stay in this country? What are the jobs that are going to grow in this country? What are the jobs that we might lose? And how do we prepare our workforce for that future situation?
But what is the likelihood of more trade given what we're seeing happen? I mean, the Brexit vote is a classic example of people not buying the argument that trade is not costing them their jobs.
Well, I think we're now beginning to see the impact of Brexit more and more. And I think the thing we have to remember is that because of very swift and brilliant actions taken by Mark Carney, of the Bank of England, and of many of the other banks, the preparation for a potential positive Brexit vote was extremely well done. And so I think the full impact of Brexit has been delayed a bit, but I think you're going to see it. You're already seeing it to an extent in terms of
in
the
pound. Currency for certain.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely, in the currency. But the negotiations haven't even started yet for what Brexit's going to look like. So I think what you're going to see is uncertainty, and I think the uncertainty is going to have a negative impact on the UK economy, potentially the EU economy, and also potentially the global economy.
Do you expect a hard landing?
Well, I'm not sure what that would mean exactly. What I hope is that the UK government, leaders in the EU, central bank governors of both the EU and the UK, the two, Mario Draghi and Mark Carney, are among the two most brilliant, effective people in the world in terms of understanding how to manage crises like this. My hope is that the leaders will manage this so that there is not a hard landing, but there are difficult negotiations ahead. It's really negotiations around trade agreements haven't been done in the UK for quite a long time. So they first have to find the people to go through to do the negotiations. I think that also just the uncertainty is going to have an impact. In developing countries, what we know is that uncertainty in the developed countries usually leads to some bad consequences in the developing countries. The bigger argument, though, is that I don't think that data, evidence, real experience, we're not winning arguments with those. Anger and emotion that are real. I mean, if you look at how the lower middle class in the developed countries have done over the last 20 years, that's the group that's probably done the worst as a result of globalization. So I think their anxiety, their anger is real. It's based on what really happened to them during a period of 2 or 3 decades. But now we have to come back.
Which makes the case for Donald Trump, then.
Well, but now we have to come back and say that being against trade is exactly the wrong way to get out of this particular hole. The economies will begin to grow more robustly only if we have more trade.
What is the sense that you get about the China story itself? I mean, we've seen volatility for the currency today, quite significant, but what's the sense that you get about the China story?
I don't right now see a hard landing for China. I think they're managing the transition very effectively. They still have plenty of reserves. So what we're hoping is that China will continue to evolve, continue to look for new drivers of growth.
Have you had any conversation with either the Indian government or the Pakistan government on the Indus Water Treaty?
You know, we have a very limited role in the Indus Water Treaty. It's more of an administrative role. So our great hope is that over time that we will find a solution to the current to the current discussions and the current disagreements that will work for both parties. It is in everybody's interest, not only Pakistan and India, but it is in the world's interest that we move toward a resolution of whatever differences that exist right now. Again, we have a very, very limited role. We just do a few things that are just based on the contract, and we will do everything we can to have the two parties come together and find a solution that works for both.
I know this is a sensitive issue, so I will not push you any further, but what would your key concern be if there were to be either a unilateral redrawing of the treaty?
Well, we want to do everything we can to ensure that the two parties come to an agreement that they can both agree on, and let me leave it at that.
All right, some interesting